Thank you for joining us again. This is the third workshop in the series. For those of you who haven't attended the other ones, we'll give you an opportunity to catch the replays in a couple of slides. However, today's topic is all about performance and technical standards. So this is the third part of the series. Though we're going to cover four standards today. The first one that we're going to cover, probably spend a little bit more time than the other ones because it's the hot topic today. Most medical devices have software, most medical devices have AI, and a lot of software's medical devices are out there today. So we're going to cover 62304, which is the standard for medical device software development, and kind of give you the history and why it's important that this standard is a part of your software design. And then we're going to dive in a little bit to electrical safety. If you've been around for a little bit, you know that this is a pretty standard electrical safety industry standard that most medical device companies follow if they have powered devices. Now, of course, it doesn't apply to implantables that don't have an electrical source, things like that, but it does apply to anything that actually has a power source. And we're going to cover what 60601 is as a group of standards, but we're also going to cover 60601-1, which is the one that's most applicable for med device. Then we're going to dive into the usability standard, another hot topic in today's world of medical devices. This is relatively new. It's something that has been put in over the last, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 years. And it is becoming a big piece of the development process. It's becoming a big piece of how companies are validating and moving through that validation to make sure that the device is not just compliant and works, but it is actually able to be used by the intended user. So we're going to talk about that. And last but not least, we can't go anywhere without medical device symbols. So we're going to talk about the international symbols and what they look like and why they exist and how they actually save for manufacturers. So we'll dive into that a little bit later in the presentation. So just some things about me. My name is Melita Ball. I'm the founder and consultant for MBC and Affiliates, Inc. Most of our clients know us as MBCA. If you want to know a little bit more about me, most of you, I think, are here, either know me or have been to other workshops. But if you haven't, please just point your camera to that QR code and you can get my bio. I won't spend a lot of time talking about my background here, but you can learn more about me by using that QR code. If you can't figure it out on your phone or you don't have your phone with you, Amanda, my co-host, is also going to be putting it in chat so that you can just click on the link and it would bring it right up. Couple of things before we get too far into the presentation, just some logistics. We are recording, so if you prefer not to be recorded, just keep your video off. And to minimize distractions, please stay on mute for the presentation. Due to the length of the presentation, we cannot have a live Q&A. I think we may be a little bit early today. We may not go the full hour, as there's only so much you can talk about without diving way deep into each one of these standards. But end a little bit early. I will leave the presentation up just so everybody has a chance to get their questions into chat. And as you know, we will then follow the presentation, or most of you know anyway, we'll follow this presentation with a document that comes directly to your email. We'll take all the questions from the chat, any of those that come personally to me. If they're specific to your company, I'm going to, take out the company specifics and kind of make it more of a general question. And everyone will have the benefit of getting those answers along with the link to the replay in case you need it. So that's what we're gonna be doing today. And this is pretty much a standard slide that I like to go over before we get started. So let's jump in. Let's talk about learning objectives. So today, because it's technical standards that we're looking at, industry standards, there's a lot of different terms for them, but we want to review the four most common performance and technical standards applicable to many medical devices, not all medical devices. That's why we want to cover this in a special session. To learn how these performance and technical standards fit into the overall development process, we're not going to go too deep in any one of these, but I'm going to give you just enough flavor for each one of them so that you can go find the standards. You can go get them if you need them. Unfortunately, they are industry standards, so they all cost money to get, but most of them are, $100, $150. There might be a couple out there that are a little bit more than that. If they are applicable for your device, you're required to have the standards, so you need to make sure that you go purchase those and completely up to speed. And certainly, once you get the standards, if you have questions, you can reach out to me. We can set up a time to go into a little bit more depth or a deep dive into that particular standard. We also want to build on previous design control and the risk management workshops. And you can see the two replays here. Again, I have the QR codes there. So if you're interested in looking at the design control replay and you missed it, that was our first workshop. You can see the QR code in the bottom at the bottom of your screen. If you missed the last one, which is really going to be super important as we move through these standards, because one thing you're going to see as a recurring theme is risk management through all of these standards. So if you missed that replay and you want to go refresh, point your camera to that QR code and it will take you to the replay of that. If you're having trouble with the QR codes, again, Amanda is going to be putting the links in the chat so you can go directly to those replays. All right. So let's dive in. So what are performance and technical standards anyway? Let's talk about that a little bit and kind of frame it up for the rest of the discussion. So many performance and technical standards come from specific niche industries, and they come from these standard setting organizations like the International Electrotechnical Commission, or IEC. You'll see a lot of that IEC. These produce a lot of standards, and when they do, they look at the whole landscape of all the regulatory standards that are out there, standards and regulations that are out in the world, and they try to develop a common practice that can be implemented globally. And at the end of the day, that actually streamlines the manufacturer's process, because if you have a global standard that everyone is adopted or most people have adopted, then it's easier to get through regulatory bodies. It's easier to build into your process up front, and you don't have all these disparate changes or ideas of how to do it. And it reduces your burden to convince a regulator that what you're doing is correct because you've followed the standard. Then that is great. So the IEC is an international standards organization that prepares and publishes all of these standards. And some of the things that they publish: electrical, electronic, and related technologies. Collectively, these technologies are known as electrotechnology. The FDA plays a role in this as well, because they either mandate or strongly suggest that the FDA compliant medical device manufacturers use some of these standards to develop products, because they're more detailed and provide greater guidance than to the organizations than the FDA regulations themselves. As you might know, the regulations give you a general idea of what you need to do, but they don't necessarily get into the prescriptive ways of doing it. And what these standard setting organizations do, they allow for the framework that walks you through the process so that you can actually be compliant with all of the pieces and components as you're moving through it. So it does go into a much greater level of detail so that you can get the process right and produce the documentation you need to prove that you've done everything you need to do. So let's dive into ISO 62304. Now, 62304 is all about software. So it's a standard for designing and developing medical device software. Now, what some people don't know is that it can be used as a standalone medical device, a software as a medical device, or it can be used for software that is embedded within a medical device. The standard covers both of those scenarios. The same standard can be used for both of those scenarios. Applicable requirements in the standard are primarily driven by the safety classification assigned to the software itself. So the very first piece of the standard is that you have to assign a safety classification to your device, whether it's a standalone software or it's software embedded. And then once you assign that safety classification to the software, then that drives all the requirements in the rest of in the standard. So it's really nice in terms of it gives you a direct path. Once you've done that first piece, you know exactly what you have to produce, you know exactly what you have to do. So there are actually 7 phases within 62304, 7 phases of software design. I've got 5 of them here in the next slide. So the first piece is project planning. So we usually integrate this with design and development by creating a software development plan. So typically, I recommend in the overall design planning that you have a design and development plan. You have a software development plan if you have software. You have a regulatory plan. and you have a risk management plan. All of those standards have those required plans built in. So that first phase of your design control really needs to focus on all of them and focus in terms of making sure that you get everything that you can get in those plans at the beginning. Now, of course, project planning and design is not a one-time effort. It is a living document throughout the design. So it's perfectly fine if you get those documents to a state that you have some TBDs. It's okay to have TBDs in those plans because you don't necessarily know what you don't know yet. But what's going to happen to those plans is those 4 plans, if you have software, those 4 plans are going to live throughout the life cycle. And every time you have a design review, you're going to bring those plans back in and say, do we need to change the plan? Do we have more information? Can we add this section? That kind of thing. So they live through the development project. And if it's software, software and risk management live beyond the development project all the way through the life cycle of the device. Okay, so the second phase in software design is that requirements gathering and analysis. Very similar, as you see, to the overall design or hardware design control requirements. You gather the requirements, you analyze the requirements, you make sure you have your customer, your user needs, your product requirements. So the user needs build into the design inputs, which build out the design outputs. And then once you have all that laid out, then you start modeling and you're developing the product to meet the requirements and the user needs. So that is from a software standpoint, you're designing the architecture to the software. So all of that is built out. And then and only then can you start actually coding into the software. So you start building that design into a coding language. And then certainly the next step is always testing. Then you have to test that product through verification and validation to confirm that the design actually meets the requirements and the user needs. So all this language is very familiar in terms of what we typically see in design and development and software and risk. So all of these 3 regulations and standards are all aligned in terms of what they're trying to accomplish. The last 2, number 6 is deployment. So transferring that code into the required environment. So a lot of times there's 3 environments when you're developing code and launching it. There's a sandbox environment or a development environment. There's a testing environment, which has to mirror the production environment. And then when everything is good, it goes over to the production environment. So all of the software kind of has this life cycle of going through those processes. Then once you actually transfer all of that software, whether it's embedded in the medical device or whether it's standalone, transfer it into what we call production, then you have to maintain it moving forward. So supporting the product after release, making sure the environment stays aligned with customer requirements and user needs, making sure the software stays updated and bug fixes happen and things like that. Now, all of these phases can be and should be interwoven into your overall design and risk management process. So just because you're using 62304 for software doesn't mean that you have to duplicate efforts. It should all be blended in. And the best software, the best quality management systems actually do that. They actually show you how everything integrates as you move through. So you're only doing design and development one time, but you're building in everything that you need for design and development as you're moving through it. Some of the core principles. I want to spend a little more time, like I said, on this particular standard because it is one that is applicable for many, many, many devices today, and it's growing. So I want to do a little bit more of a deep dive in this one. So the first thing we have to think about is 62304 is the approach. The approach that it brings to the table is very different than some of the other approaches for software development that have been around that weren't so great for regulatory environments. And that is, the traditional models or even agile modules for software development. Those are iterative processes. They're very difficult to comprehend. They're also an advanced kind of way of producing code. However, natively out of the box, agile does not produce the documentation needed for regulatory purposes. You have to really force it into agile. So that's one of the things that 62304 is a breath of fresh air because it has it all built in. It actually emphasizes the documentation and management of software components and how you do that effectively in a regulated environment. So for that reason alone, It really does make it a better suited process for regulated industries because everything is built in. And then you have the confidence to know when you have to submit after your device is on the market, you have someone come in to audit or inspect your facility, you have the confidence that you followed 62304 and it produced the documentation you need to prove that you did it correctly. Okay, so the approach in and of itself is really well suited for the medical device community and the regulations that we need to follow. And if we follow 62304, it actually helps streamline our processes downstream. And if you're a member of a small medical device or this is your first device that you're trying to get to the market, it's really important because it will reduce delays or eliminate actual delays. A lot of people get down the road and ready to submit and they get rejected from the FDA because they don't have enough documentation or they don't have the right documentation, doesn't line up, they don't have traceability, that kind of thing. And all of this is built into 62304 out of the box. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about, and you're going to see this as a theme, is that it is integrated to risk management principles in ISO 14971. So it complements and is aligned with 14971. Hazard identification, risk estimation and evaluation, risk control, and effectiveness monitoring are all required for software in 62304. So they live right alongside the everything that you're doing for risk management in 14971. So it's really important for the overall medical device design and development process that these standards now are actually integrated with each other and you can follow them very easily. It also emphasizes the importance of maintaining comprehensive documentation for all risk management activities, and that just ensures that you have traceable products, that you have traceable software throughout the device's life. Last but not least, we're going to talk about software configuration management. 62304 does a fantastic job of really defining and blowing out the requirements for software configuration management. It's embedded into the standard. It's not something extra that you have to go find or figure out or learn. It is actually embedded in the standards and it ensures that software items are identified, they're managed, and they're traceable through the device's life cycle. And those are things that are built in to the standard and deliverables if you follow 62304 through. It is also critical that you have SCM for software changes in the future because you need to systematically implement and document those so that you don't end up in a situation where you have unintended software behavior that is really difficult to track down. So not only does it help you get to market, it helps you stay on the market because once you start having issues happen in the field and those things come back, if you haven't done a good job of SCM, then it's really difficult, especially in software, to track down the root cause and to eliminate that root cause. If you've done a good job with 62304, then those components are easier to identify, they're easier to track down, and they're easier to eliminate the root cause of the problem. Okay. Also, when we're doing updates, 62304 has already embedded in it version control, change control, release management, all essential for maintaining software integrity and also traceability. And as you see, I keep saying the same things over because they are aligned with overall design and development processes and overall design and development requirements, also risk management requirements, and then the software comes along for the ride and integrates very seamlessly. That concludes 62304. We're going to switch gears now and talk about IEC 60601-1. And as you can see by the picture here, it's all about electrical safety. So let's dive into electrical safety. So first thing I want to talk about is 60601 is actually a series of standards. It's not just one standard. And we're talking about 60601-1 today, which is the collateral standard, because it's the most common section or the most common collateral standard required for medical devices powered by electricity. That doesn't mean it's the only collateral standard within that group of standards that may be required depending on the specifics of your device. And if that's confusing to you, this is really well suited to bring in somebody who knows what they're doing, who knows how to evaluate your device for these things and put it into your design and development plan, even if you have to have outside help to come in to make that analysis because it's going to save you time and money down the road. If you just hand over 60601 to an electrical safety house to do your testing, they're going to do it all. And it's going to cost you a lot of money and it's going to take a long time. And not every device needs everything. So to do that analysis up front, it's actually going to save you a ton of money and a ton of time in the future. So subsequent collateral standards, what do I mean by that? They address those very specific safety aspects or device categories that may need specific things like electromagnetic compatibility, usability, which is more common now than making sure that, that it's usable, and even environmental design. So all of 60601-1 plus some of these other standards may be applicable. So it's really important that you do that analysis up front or as early as possible so that you know what you're looking at. Again, this standard integrates with ISO 14971 for risk management. It highlights the requirements for systematic risk management process and points actually to 14971 and making sure that you've done a good job of doing that analysis, of doing that risk management, and determining which electrical safety components actually need to be tested. It also specifies requirements for technical documentation and labeling to facilitate the traceability and informed use, which is also part and parcel for risk management. As part of your FMEA process, you're trying to figure out, what do we need to label? What do we need to control? Now let's talk a little bit about money and electrical safety. The first thing, testing needs to be budgeted into the overall design budget early, because it does take some time to get it done. And it does take some money to get it done, because most manufacturers don't have the capability or the certifications to be able to run these tests. So that you have to go find an external or third-party testing house to do it. These third-party testing houses are inundated, so there's oftentimes a long lead time before you can actually get in to a testing facility. So you want to just make sure, the best advice I can give you right now, if you're looking at an electrical safety piece, start getting quotes, start getting ideas on who you want to do the testing very early in the process, so that you can have time to make sure all of that lines up. Because one of the worst things that can happen in this situation is that you don't get it done in time, and then it delays your market initiation. So you can't get to market without without these certs. Okay. Testing houses like UL and others specialize in electrical safety for performing those testing, and they'll just deliver the report. But again, it does take time to get on their schedule, and depending on what you have them doing, it could take a little bit of time as well. Again, I can't stress enough, it's important to do the assessment up front. Do not leave that to the testing house. It will cost you more money than you need and more time, even if you have to hire someone outside to determine which tests need to be done for your specific device. And these are device specific, so there's no way that I can give you a general guidance on this. But make sure you have someone come in, do that assessment, so that you make sure that you have the list that needs to be done for your device. Also build it into your planning phases, build it into your DDP, your design and development plan, your software development plan, your risk management plan. All right, let's switch gears to IEC 62366-1, which is the medical device usability standard. Now, there's a lot of talk about usability today, and a lot of talk about, what you need to do and how you need to implement it into your design control process. The good news is, like the previous standards that we talked about, usability is kind of integrated into the overall processes that we've already talked about as well. Just have to make sure we get it done. So 62366 is a process-based standard that aims to help manufacturers of medical device design for high usability. So usability should be part of every design component that you develop. So when you're looking at a design component or you're looking at a risk, then you should be thinking about usability and actually documenting what kinds of things around usability that you need to build in. Whether it's a dial or a button or a switch, you have to take into account how the user is going to actually be able to use that device. It also aims to reduce errors caused by inadequate usability. If someone designs a product and they're not really thinking about the end users, a lot of times developers can develop really elegant designs, but unfortunately, they're not very usable to the audience that they're designing them for. And if that's not taken into account, then there's a lot of errors that can happen once that device goes to the field, especially if we're talking about home use devices. If you're going to sell your device to the patient, meaning home use, going straight to the patient, and the patient's going to be required to kind of figure it out and follow the steps, then it's even more important to make sure that your design is intuitive, that it's easy. You have to take things into account like the population. If the population is an aging population, you have to take arthritic hands into play. There's all kinds of things that you need to look at. And building that into the design up front is going to save you time and money in the future, because if you put your device on the market without good usability, you're going to be inundated with complaints, and you're going to have to document and file every single one of those. So it's better to build it in up front than to wait until the market. And it's also required. So we need to make sure that we're building usability into all of our design verification, design validation plans, but also looking at it in terms of risk as well. Okay. One note, if you do need to comply with 60601-1, if you do have an electrical device, remember when I talked about electrical device, one of those collateral standards is usability. So you will be required to follow this standard as well if you have an electrical device. So this standard is applicable if 60601-1 is applicable, then 62366 is applicable for you as well. So let's talk about, what does it emphasize? So the standard really emphasized the importance of focusing on user needs. I think if you guys go back to the replay of the very first workshop that we had on design and development, where did we start? We started with user needs, right? So it's all about, what does the intended user need for this device to do? And that's really about what usability is all about. It's all about the user, what they need to know to effectively use the device. It also emphasizes the importance of iterative feedback. So usability is not just something you do at the end, right before you transfer over. It's built into the whole process so that you're getting iterative feedback. Even if you're putting prototypes in a demo situation in hands of people, you want to get your device in the hands of potential users as soon and as often as you can, so that you can continually get that feedback, continually to build the results of that feedback into your design and development process, so that when you get to design validation and you're building in a usability study into design validation, then it's going to be a seamless integration into your validation, and you're going to pass with flying colors. Again, another theme that we've been talking about with these industry standards is that this standard also requires comprehensive documentation. It's the old adage, if it's not documented, it didn't happen. That's really true in all of these standards and regulations that we've been talking about. Documentation is kind of the bedrock of and foundational principles for compliance, but also for business reasons, because when you get information back from the field that either says, hey, the device isn't working, or we're having an issue, or this is the best device ever, all of that feedback comes back, and then you're able to incorporate it successfully into your documentation if you have the documentation to begin with. You're also able to do root cause analysis and really drive to continuous improvement if you have it documented, because you know where things are, and you can really do a deep dive and use your risk management tools and everything to actually make your product better and better in the market, which then will increase your bottom line. So it is a business responsibility as well. Don't just do this for compliance reasons, do it for business reasons as well, because it will enhance your continuous improvement in the market. Let's see what else. The documentation traceability goes from user needs to design inputs, to design outputs, to verification, and ultimately to validation, similar to kind of the overall design control process. We start with user needs, which then goes into design inputs, design outputs, verification, and validation. So you have this nice traceability matrix. The same should be true for the usability components within that scheme. All right, I'm just going to stop here a minute and talk about medical device symbols, the international symbols. And here before you is a panel that has some of them on there. And you can see, I would just like you to take a minute and look at this screen and quickly say, without reading the captions underneath them, do you know what they mean? Most of us know some of them, right? Because we've been inundated for these for years and years and years, and we didn't even know it as consumers. And it's not just for medical devices. There's lots of symbols that are reused, not just for med devices, but used for daily kinds of things. So you have right here, if you have an umbrella with rain falling on it, that typically means, oh, shouldn't get that wet, right? If you have a glass, a wine glass, then that means it's fragile. You can break it. Some things like some of you may have children or loved ones who are allergic to latex. You get really used to seeing this symbol because that means latex is in there. So you need to make sure that people that are allergic to latex don't come in contact with it. Things that are sterile or not sterile. Most of us know this symbol here, which means do not reuse. It's a disposable device. You shouldn't be reusing things like needles and things like that. So a lot of times those are packaged there. What are some of the others? The temperatures. These are a little tougher because they're very, very similar in nature. But if you see these little horizontal marks on this one, it means that there is a limitation. There's a temperature range that it needs to be in. Whereas this one means that there is a lower limit temperature. It means it can't go below that. See, there's no stop at the top, but it cannot go below that temperature. And then this one is the opposite. It can't go above that temperature. So those are just some of the things that you can see in this symbol list that really do impact all of us. And most of us know some of these. Now, just in daily life, things like the two arrows sticking up, that we mostly know that because everything you get in life, not just medical devices, if it needs to be oriented a certain way, then you have those little arrows saying it must be sitting this way. But of course, most of us also have the experience of Amazon delivering to our house, and those arrows always tend to be the opposite of what they should be. At least that's my experience. I don't know about you guys. But anyway, the point is that we've been inundated with these for some time now, that now we can actually start recognizing them. Here is a really good symbol here. So this is a manufacturer. So this is someone who manufactured for the manufacturer. Okay. And then we have the CE mark there as well. So let's dive into medical device symbols. I don't have a whole lot here. Symbols are pretty easy to talk about. Some of the things that you want to think about is that they express information supplied for the medical device without using a lot of space. And just think about that a minute. How does that benefit you as a manufacturer? We're going to tell you in just a few minutes. But they must comply to these international standards. And if you remember from the first slide, the standard for these symbols, it's updated often. The last time it was updated is 2021 because there's constantly innovation going on and there's constantly new symbols coming out. So the most important thing you can do is make sure you stay up to date on what the international symbols are. Get a copy of the standard, stay updated with the standard. And when you're placing international symbols on your medical device, make sure that they comply with the latest and greatest version of the standard. One of the other things I get all the time is, where do we put these symbols? Well, pretty much anywhere. You can use them on the medical device themselves. A lot of times we'll see hazards or pinch points, the ones that are on this screen, kind of those yellow caution symbols. We'll see a lot of those on the medical device itself. You can also put symbols on the primary packaging, which is the packaging that is typically inside the box that houses the actual device. You can also put it on secondary packaging, which could be, if it's different components that are displayed in a kit, then the kit box would be the secondary packaging, and then each individual device would be packaged inside. So the secondary packaging, it could appear there. It could even appear on the shipping container, especially if there's temperature controls and things like that. A lot of times they have to be put on the outside of the shipping container to make sure that they're maintained. And then they could also be in any kind of accompanying documentation like an IFU or an information for use or a manual for some devices, any of that, these symbols can be placed in. So there's really no limit to where you can put them. The most important thing, though, is that they need to comply with the international standards for symbols that is updated frequently. So what's the significance of symbols? So first, it reduces the language barriers and ensures proper usage and handling of medical devices. So just think about this. If we didn't have these symbols, we'd have to write all this information out. And then you would have to translate it in multiple languages if you're shipping your device into multiple countries. This actually gives us a language that is a pictorial language that conveys the same amount of information with just a picture. So it reduces language barriers, but it also reduces space on your packaging or your medical device. It helps reduce potential errors of interpretation of what something means and device instructions, particularly in high stress situations. So if you are an EMT and you're in a high stress situation, you've been trained on these symbols, you know what these symbols are. If you have to pull down a defibrillator, you know what the symbols are on it, you know what you need to do. You can quickly act under stress because you're just looking at pictures. Your brain can process that a lot faster than the written word. So you don't have to read instructions necessarily. You can see these quick guides, and you can see a lot of times devices and just general products will come with quick start guides now. And guess what? Those quick start guides have very little language on them. They're mostly pictures. They're mostly pictures of how to do something because it helps the brain quickly get up to speed on what they need to do. The key here is that it can significantly reduce your costs as a manufacturer because it reduces your labeling processes. It reduces the amount of translations you need to have, and translations can be expensive if you have multiple languages that you need to convey. So symbols do have a very big business role to play in this process. So this industry standard is really important to make sure that we can all be safe and convey the information that we need to convey with a picture instead of language. So that concludes the time with you. I knew we were going to probably be a little bit early. Great. I give you 15 minutes back of your day. Again, if you guys have specific questions or you have very specific targeted questions that are for your medical device that you don't want to put in the chat, please book a complimentary 9-minute call with me. You can point your phone to that QR code. I'm happy to hop on a phone call with you to see if we can get some clarity around any of these standards or anything else that you want to talk about in the regulatory and compliance landscape. So you can scan here to book a call. And with that, I will say thank you, thank you, thank you. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much for those of you who have been to all of the workshops. Please leave a comment on LinkedIn on what you thought and would really look forward to your feedback. And if you have suggestions for future workshops, please reach out to me. You can DM me or email me, provide that feedback or provide what you would like to see in the future. Then I'm happy to put workshops together again for this kind of event. But this concludes our 3-part series of workshops. I hope it was valuable to you, and I hope you had a really good experience with all of it. If you are still putting questions in the chat, I'm going to hang around just for another minute or two. You want to unmute, you can unmute, but we're going to stop recording now. And thank you all.